Wow, Andy, you set me up like a pro for a comedic opening. You called me a midwife. Because what I do remember of that period of time was the fact there was a lot of crying, there was a lot of screaming, there were some tears, but I was in the right place at the right time because, as you know, a woman in labor always delivers, right? I wish I could say we set that up ahead of time. It's an old joke I use a lot. Actually, it's Richard Hatfield's joke from many, many years ago when he appointed a woman as a labor minister in New Brunswick. And it was Tilly O'Neill Gordon who told me that he used to say that. And I've gladly stolen it, actually, since then. And glad that I had an appropriate time to be able to use it in the context instead of making that giant reach to make something funny. I am absolutely thrilled to be here today. Bonjour et merci de cette amiable présentation. You know, as Andy pointed out, and as you know, there are some significant transportation challenges here in the Lower Mainland and on the West Coast in terms of fluidity, efficacy, and meeting transportation demand. And I do know that we have to meet these challenges in order to ensure that our economy is sound and that we continue to do what we can in supporting international trade. So I'm really happy to be here today. I'm going to share some important developments in the past couple of months, but predominantly this is my first engagement for my 4 days here on the West Coast, where I will be engaging all the parties, along with Minister Stone as well, with respect to this ongoing issue regarding drayage at the Port of Metro Vancouver. And you can rest assured we will be hearing from everybody that is pertinent to the issue, and we're trying to get to the right place. And that you can hear from me and you can hear from Minister Stone. We are on the same page because these are challenges that we face, but we do have to face them together, and we do have to make sure that we challenge ourselves to get to the right answer. You know, when you think about transportation in the country, at least where I've been in the transportation field a long time now, but predominantly I've been minister now for about a year, actually over a year, just over a year. July 15 was my swearing in last year. And this is kind of how I break it up in terms of making sure we have a good system. You have to have really good policy. You have to have regulation, not too much, not too little, but you have to have regulation. You have to have infrastructure, and you have to have sound operations. And that's part of the thing that I'll take you through today, where our government is on those key facets, where the role of private sector is in these, and where I see us moving towards the future. You know, first and foremost, Canada is a trading nation, and it's a bit of an old saw. We say it a lot, but it is so very true. And as such, I fully understand the importance of transportation because you can't move stuff from the point of origin to the point of destination unless you have a great transportation system in the middle. So it's integral to our economy, it's integral to our economic growth and prosperity, and that's why trade policy is so very important and really is the bailiwick of the government in terms of jurisdiction. We do set policy on the federal level for the purposes of trade and for the purposes of transportation. But on trade specifically, there are two things we have to make sure we're doing correctly in the transportation sector. We need to make sure, first of all, that we can respond to global change, that we have the ability and the tools to respond to any changes that are happening in the world. And secondly, and more importantly, we have to make sure that our transportation systems can actually react to global demand. And I'm talking about everything, not just the movement of goods. I'm talking about the movement of people as well, too. No question, our physical infrastructure has to be up to the task for this. But we have to plan strategically. We need to do so to make sure that we're positioned well in the future. And the best way to do that is to make sure that we are maintaining and developing stronger and stronger relationships, both with public partners abroad, here at home, but as well private partners as well, too. So what we've done in our government over the past 7 years is we have concluded free trade agreements with over 10 countries, in less than 7 years. And Minister Fast is out there negotiating 30 more. And you know, we've had two significant breakthroughs. First of all, the Prime Minister last year announced a historic agreement in principle with the European Union. And that opens up a market of 500 million consumers to our country, which is a great, great opportunity, both in terms of transportation, but in terms of our commodities and our businesses as well, too. And in March of this year, the Prime Minister announced a trade agreement with Korea. This is really important for us here on the West Coast because it is the first with an Asian country. Now, South Korea is not only a major economic player, it is a key market for Canada, but it serves as a gateway for us to that incredibly dynamic Asia-Pacific region of which everybody in this room is quite familiar, I'm sure. So the second piece of policy other than trade is you have to have good logistics policies. And this is where I think in Canada we have absolutely excelled. And in fact, we're looked as an international model, and somehow we got it right. As you know, we wanted to make sure that our system was well connected to each other, that it allowed connectivity into the rest of the world, that our markets that we wanted to get into, the destination markets, could be assured and understand that we could handle increased volumes resulting from new trade. So that's why we developed a gateway approach. And we kind of talk in terms of the Asia-Pacific Gateway so much right now. It's part of our nomenclature. It's what we know, it's what we live every day, but it really is an incredible achievement. We approached the matter in a way to think about our infrastructure in a very logistic manner. We thought about what are the bottlenecks, where are the places along the chain that we really do need to improve. So in 2006, with the launch of the Asia-Pacific Gateway and Corridor Initiative, we were well on our way to strengthening our global chains. And what we have today is a seamless network of seaports, of rail, of roads, and border as well too. All very important. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the movement of people as well through our airports. And how we did it is different because we welcomed public-private partnerships. And it's that collaboration that has really made the success in the Asia-Pacific Gateway. Everybody agreed to a common goal. We all agreed on what the projects would be, and we set about to do it. It was very Canadian in a sense, and I quite enjoy speaking both in Europe and the United States when we're talking about how we approached it, because the amount of success and the great changes we've seen here since 2006 is amazing. And it's not just a local benefit. It really is a benefit that we feel in the rest of the country as well, too. When you have these better trade routes and you have these better supply chains, you're getting to international markets that really do matter for everybody in the country. And I'm going to go back to public-private partnerships and why that was so important, and partnering with municipal levels of government and partnering with provincial levels of government as well, too. And it's because, at the end of the day, we took a $1.4 billion investment in the federal Canadian taxpayer, and we're able to lever it into $3.5 billion. And that really does put people's money to work very well. And you can't do it without collaboration and working alongside each other. Now, what we wanted at the end of the day was an integrated and an efficient transportation system, but what we have achieved is much more. We are in a position where we can make the most of those opportunities for trade in Asia, in Europe, and in North and South America as well, too. So a third piece of policy making is one that's more recent and one that has come out of my shop in the past couple of weeks. And that is making sure that we take a look into the future, that we have to ensure we create good conditions, just like we did with Asia-Pacific Gateway, that we create good conditions for a competitive and a sustainable transportation system to help us compete internationally as well. So last month, I launched a review of the Canadian Transportation Act, and I'm very pleased to say that the chairman of this panel is David Emerson, who many of you in the room already know, and we've got great representation from East and West, and I would submit as well we have gender representation too, because as you would expect, that would be a top priority for me as well as we develop and understand what our priorities in transportation are for the next 20 years. It's a great opportunity. It's 18 months, and it's an opportunity to take a look at our legislation, to take a look at our policy frameworks, policy and regulation, the two areas in which the federal government has much say and much ability to make changes. Got to make sure they're up to date, and we have to make sure that they have the right measures for modern times. You know, it's been 13 years since we did a review of transportation legislation in the country. And I was reminded a couple of weeks ago by a colleague of mine that when Minister Collinette did the review, as he did 13 years ago, that I actually was I deputed there. I brought in a submission on behalf of the Toronto Port Authority. So I've been involved in the CTA review process in the past, and I do know how important it is, because it has to underpin other parts of our policy agenda, having to do with trade competitiveness, international competitiveness, and prosperity. You have to look at the national network. And the big question we have right now is about capacity. Do we have the capacity? Do we have the nimbleness to meet the demands that our international trade deals, hopefully, will be bringing to the country for our goods and our services and our people? So I know that under the guidance and under the review of David Emerson, we will get solid recommendations for a plan for the future. So I talked about policy from the federal government, regulations from the federal government. Another important piece of the pie, of course, is having infrastructure. Nuts and bolts of infrastructure really is about nuts and bolts, physically. We need to have physical networks. We need to have good roads. We need to have solid and safe rail. We need to have fantastic ports. We need to have state-of-the-art air facilities so that people and goods can move safely and securely and efficiently. So, following the direction we established in our Gateway initiatives, we will continue to move ahead and ensure that we invest in world-class infrastructure. And that is a platform and a base for us to make sure that our economy continues to prosper. Our plan provides $70 billion for public infrastructure over the next decade. It is the longest and the largest infrastructure plan in our nation's history. And its investments will enhance our global competitiveness, tying back into our trade policy agenda. Now, we have and we will continue to deliver infrastructure projects in this region that not only fuel Canada's economy, but as well, and truly important, is to help with the local flow in terms of roads and rail traffic. And of course, in order to make sure we have sustainable transportation, that we do so on a low greenhouse gas emissions level. So moving from infrastructure to operating, I just want to talk about two aspects, and really they are things that have to do with not so much the government, but really the private and the semi-private public sector. Most of you are likely aware that I and my provincial counterpart, Minister Stone, have made an extraordinary, I would say, intervention with respect to trucking at the Port of Metro Vancouver. Now, normally, operations and government don't go hand in hand, especially the Conservative government in Ottawa. We don't necessarily like intervention in the operations of businesses. But these issues that we've seen over the past several months show that some of the challenges that face the transportation sector when it comes to labor matters do need to have our governmental help. Now, I'm pleased about the accomplishments over the past 2 months. I'm very pleased that the port was able to return to full operations. And we've been collectively implementing ourselves, the government of British Columbia, Port Metro Vancouver, other partners, to make sure that we have an action plan, which we do, that helps to maintain truck labor stability at the port. I continue to work with Minister Stone and management at the port to ensure that the commitments in the action plan are being met, and as I indicated, I will be meeting Minister Stone later on today, and I'll be meeting with the players with respect to this issue. So why are we involved at the federal government level? It's very simple. With all the investments, with all the work in policy, with all the work in regulation, Port Metro Vancouver is simply too important to the economic health of the region. It's too important, the economic health of our country, to let issues and irritants like this to continue to fester. So we took an extraordinary measure to intervene. You know, the port has to be able to move those goods efficiently, either for import or for export. And as well, as Andy pointed out, Andy and everybody else involved, Robin, Port of Metro Vancouver, we worked very hard to maintain and get labor stability and an unprecedented 8-year deal, which was just remarkable. We did it because we wanted to make sure we had the best global reputation when it came to being able to deal with goods and trade. We accomplished it. So that was a lot of work to get there. And it makes sense that we would want to make sure that we stay in order to build on our reputation for outstanding service and continue to follow it along the way, just like we did when we took the approach of gateways, looking for the bottlenecks along the way. The whole system has to hold together. This is a part that isn't holding together right now, and that's why it needs everybody's attention and everybody's efforts. And I'm very confident that with the people on the steering committee and the people around the table, we will get to that solution that makes sense and that ensures that Port Metro Vancouver will continue to be the economic giant it is for this part of the world, and definitely for the rest of Canada as well, too. I would, just for a moment, I'd like to just highlight what I think. You know, as I said, I was a Minister of Labour. I'll always have carry that part of me for sure after all the work that we've done out here. And I've talked about investing in infrastructure, and I've talked about investing in trade policy. But you know, there really is another form of investment that is incredibly important. And I'd like just to highlight it for a moment as I could. And that really is the investment in people, the women and the men who are on the front lines here in terms of the port. Now, globalization means that there's going to be some rapid technological changes in all of our transportation sectors. And the only way to meet these changes, just like at the beginning, you have to be ready for whatever change is handed to you globally. In order to be ready for it, you need to make sure that your workers are properly trained and properly supported. And that comes from 3 different areas, right? Employers have a responsibility to train, there's no question about it. Educational institutions, also important training. And we are well involved in the government, both in the federal and the provincial levels as well, too. And training and support is on the rise in Canada. So last year, I was very pleased to be able to attend the opening of the new British Columbia Maritime Employers Association Waterfront Training Center that Andy pointed out already today. And what this training center does is it trains women and men who choose to have a career in transportation. And it's a real difference in how it used to be in the ports in the past, where if you were able-bodied, physically strong, probably a man, you would be taken on by the port, you would be trained, and you'd be put to work. So it's different now. Now we're looking more to a diversified force, permanent, multi-skilled professional people who choose to pursue a great career in port business. And it really is a great career. I returned to Cape Breton for my vacation. I'm from Cape Breton. I went home for 2 weeks, just back yesterday, actually. And I just thought to myself, you know, I can't seem to escape the transportation field, because I literally grew up on a street, the last house on the street at the International Coal Piers, where the boats would be loaded by the trains. And it's remarkable to think that it's followed me throughout my entire career. But one thing I've known, and I've always known, is that these are really good jobs in the transportation sector. And there are things that people should be encouraged to pursue, men and women, in terms of a great way to have a decent wage and a good living building your family. In 2012, BCMEA trained 2,600 people. 900 of them were new recruits. And they themselves enrich the workforce, and they make the West Coast here a preferred destination for global shippers. You got to have the right people with the right skills at the right time. That helps you on efficiency, that helps us in increased trade. Now, as you know, I was here on the West Coast most recently talking about our world-class tanker safety system. And Transport Canada is leading with respect to that, because transportation, as I said, has to be sustainable as well, too. And in this case, it really is a mixture of not just overarching policy, but regulations as well, too. Now that we want to make sure that we have an efficient network, we've got the right people trained in order to move our goods, we have to ensure that it is understood in the world markets that we can do this in a safe and a responsible way environmentally. So the measures that we announced on the world-class tanker safety system, I think will go a long way. And they're built on some pretty simple pillars. You want to prevent a spill from happening. You want to make sure that if it does happen, you're prepared to respond. And lastly, the principle of polluter pays, that liability and compensation flows from the polluter. But realistically, the most of my time, I would say, in the past year since I've become the Minister of Transport, I would say I deal with the safety issues with respect to rail safety and the transportation of dangerous goods following on the tragedy that happened in Lac-Mégantic. And we have done much. We have moved, I would say, at lightning speed when it comes to the government, at least, because I know nothing moved that fast when I was on the other side of the fence looking into the government. But we have moved. We've strengthened rail safety, transportation of dangerous goods regulations. And we've done it for the communities, and we've done it for the rail industry as well, too. And it's the same three pillars. We want to make sure we prevent derailments and spills from happening. We want to make sure that communities and first responders are prepared and are ready to respond, and we want to make sure that the polluter does pay. Liability and compensation are incredibly important. And where we see deficiencies as we go through this process, we will act. So, for example, we took an extraordinary measure most recently to order the phase-out or refitting of certain rail tank cars that do not meet our safety standards. We did move outside of the U.S. in terms of the speedy addressing of this issue, but we felt it was important to do so for our communities and definitely for our system, ensuring that we are environmentally responsible and that we take safety to our higher standards. We also ordered developments of emergency response assistance plans to ensure that those who are responding are prepared to do so and that they have the correct information so that if you're dealing with an accident involving dangerous goods, you know what's happening. I finally like to conclude just by pointing out I would say, a great accomplishment and my heartfelt congratulations to the Vancouver International Airport. Now, I've been sitting next to Craig for the whole lunch, and for many times I wanted to congratulate you for this, but I wanted to save it for the podium. Craig, I want to say that congratulations, Vancouver International Airport, named the #1 airport in North America in 2014 Skytrax Award, so congratulations. And for the 5th consecutive year, named one of the best 10 best airports in the world. And that's, this stuff is really important because that strong air sector builds a stronger Canada. And the facilities here in Vancouver are state-of-the-art, they're beautiful, and they play an incredibly key role. And I know that the aviation industry will continue in its progress, and they will continue to play their part that involves in the growing list of air transport agreements that we are signing under our Blue Sky policy. We have concluded new or expanded air transport agreements with more than 80 countries. And that's really important. It's options for businesses, it's options for travelers, it's options for shippers. All of these things benefit our entire economy. So I know I've left a little bit of time at the end for questions, but surely I've answered all your questions with my very long introduction and my very long speech today. But when I have a moment in a captive audience and you're all fueled up on coffee, I will take the opportunity to let you know what's going on in my head with respect to transportation. There's no question that this part of the country is incredibly important when it comes to transportation policy and the direction that we're pursuing in transportation. And as you can see, most of our transportation initiatives here specifically are trying to connect into that global supply chain, not just through this region, but through the continent and beyond the continent, frankly. So many of the actions that we have to take to plan, to regulate, so policy, regulation, investment in infrastructure, and as well, ensuring that we're supporting the operation of this logistics chain. These are all really important, but they're all very complex. So we can only do it together. But I'm sure that the measures that we have taken in the past, the ones that we're going to build on, and the new measures that we're taking as we move into the future will help us build that transportation network that is, first and foremost, it's always got to be safe. Secondly, it's always got to be secure. Efficiency is next. And finally, and not necessarily out of order in terms of importance, environmentally responsible as well too. And I'm really grateful for having the opportunity today to be able to discuss how all of these things are contributing to our communities and to our country's economic future. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions that Robin has, except for the ones associated with his Port Metro Vancouver. So, thanks, Robin.
Thank you very much, Minister Raitt. Certainly the framework you've laid out of policy, the right amount of regulation, infrastructure and sound operations shows clearly the breadth and scale of the agenda that you and your government have been tackling to make Canada successful as an international trading nation. I'm told that we're actually quite tight on time, so I'm only being allowed to ask a couple of questions from the Transportation Committee.
Oh.
And given you're not allowing me to ask about the port.
No, you can. Go ahead.
No, I'm actually going to ask about the airport. The Transportation Committee, acknowledging, as you did, that we have a great airport here that we're all proud of in the Lower Mainland, wondered if you could say a bit more about some of the policies the government is following around liberalised air access, transit without visa, and APEC to further improve the competitiveness of the airport.
That's a tough question. Craig, as you'll remember last year, we brought the CEOs of airports together, or at least a representation of them, to talk about what are the irritants in airports. How can we change some policy? How can we move things around a little bit better so that you're operating more efficiently? And of course, everybody knows that one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now are people complaining about wait times, I think it's fair to say, as you go through security. And if you've flown recently through Vancouver, I understand that the longer lines may be happening. Certainly my Twitter feed lights up telling me that there's longer lines with respect to going through security here in Vancouver, and it's happening across the country. So we're taking a hard look. I can tell the committee, we're taking a really hard look at some practical things that we can do at Transport Canada to encourage CATSA to move in the direction of moving or increasing the throughput of passengers per hour. You know, everybody's got to, you're all in private businesses here. You have to have a benchmark to adhere to. You just can't have a business where you don't know what you're trying to achieve. And we take it very seriously that there should be benchmarks. It should be a reasonable benchmark, but it should also be one that you strive to achieve. So that has proven to be a very complex issue, but one of which I'm grateful for the CEOs of the airports. Craig, I think you are actually the chair of this committee, helping us try to determine how the best way to move forward on it, and we'll get somewhere with respect to ensuring that we can keep up with the pace. You know, we've seen an increase in passenger traffic in this country of 40% over the past, I think, 10 or 15 years, which is quite remarkable. And the airports have done an excellent job in their roles of no longer being government-controlled entities, and indeed investment and infrastructure and excellent lean operations, and it's our job to make sure that the regulations fit with it as well too. I'm sure it'll come up in the CTA review, but in the meantime, it is a priority in my office to ensure that we're doing all we can to give the appropriate policy umbrella to CATSA and encourage them along the way to move it forward. And I would say with respect to airports as well too, you can never compromise safety and security. That's always going to be our first and foremost, but certainly we do want to see an efficient means of doing so, and I am cognizant of the issues associated with, how shall I say it, people going across the border to fly instead of staying on this side of the border. I know Craig has a point of view on it and may have said that from the podium here in Vancouver last year or a year and a half ago. Definitely caught my attention, and that's why it's important to note that in the Canadian Transportation Act review, there is a very specific section in there to talk about costing at airports. We do want Mr. Emerson to delve into it, to understand it, and to make sure that we don't have this leakage across the border that you're experiencing right now. We'd like to have our Canadians flying out of here. That being said, the last part about transit visa, Minister Blaney, myself, and Minister Alexander are working on the issue and take it very seriously, and we do view it as a positive move forward, and we'll do all we can to help with respect to that as well.